What's up, sexies? Welcome back. Death of the Fingers. After many questions and I guess partial requests and things of this nature, we're going to take a break from all the crazy music stuff and we're going to get right down to the meat and potatoes of the modes. Okay, listen, I'm just going to go through each degree of the major scale. That means the Ionian mode, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, Locrian, and back to Ionian again. And I'm going to show you everything that you basically need to know with respect to that one position, okay? And the basic theory and the systems, how they relate, okay? Like caged, how does that relate to the scale, blah, 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 the whole 9 yards. I'm gonna lay it all out. At least the basic level information, which is already gonna be pretty significant. We're gonna go through 3 levels, scales. We're gonna get into some arpeggios, of course. The arpeggios and chords can basically go together, but we're not going to really worry about chords because that's some mega boring stuff and nobody wants to do that. So we're just going to concentrate on some of the lead ideas. And then we're going to end up with some sort of like more advanced techniques about how to combine these notes together using more sort of exotic techniques like hybrid technique and string skipping and contour scales and sort of interval scales and how to make different applications to this information to then turn it into, like, from, I guess you could say, a practice exercise into an actual musical tool that you could use in a solo. Okay? So, today, this week, Ionian, feel the burn. The major scale is about to kick you square in the balls. Let's do this. All right, beauties, let's get into this lesson. Essentially what we need to do, obviously, is establish a parent key. And we're going to use G major, of course, which is the 3rd fret on the low E string. Right now, listen, the first piece of information, I've said this a million times on these video series, is that you actually need to know with respect to scales and improvisations is the minor pentatonic scale. It's the most basic scale that you can learn. And so, yes, there is a major pentatonic, and it starts here at the 3rd fret, in this case, G major. Right? Based in the Ionian position, they're all sort of related. The major pentatonic and the Ionian scale and the major scale are basically one and the same thing, just slightly different from each other. One has only 5 notes of the scale, and the scale itself, the major scale, has all 7 notes. Okay, the pentatonic, the one with 5, only has 5, clearly. And the major scale, the diatonic scale, has 7. I know, shocker. So essentially, that's the lowest piece of information I need to know and understand. Everything I'm going to do after that is basically related to this basic principle. Okay, take everything down to the lowest common denominator and then build your castle up from there. Don't start in the middle and be like, oh yeah, no, this is going to work out. No, it's going to get all lopsided and the foundation will be weak and it'll just collapse and then you're going to be back to square one. No fun. So, first piece of information is the major pentatonic. Dunsky. Okay, so that's the first step. The next step is let's fill in more of the spaces of that minor pentatonic and take it from a scale with only 5 notes to a scale with 7 notes, what we call a diatonic scale, in this case, G major. Now it's no longer G major pentatonic, it's just G major. After I do that, then I can then start to sort of break down the idea about how certain systems work in tandem with each other, like the caged chord system. Okay, I'm going to try to get that out again. The caged chord system and the major scale, okay? Now listen, you can obviously change the tonality of the chord to the other ones, right? Like diminished or minor, and then just apply the same principles. But for today and this week, obviously, we're talking about the major scale, so everything's going to be based around the major stuff. But you could later on just make changes. And instead of playing a major chord, you're going to play a minor chord, and then you're going to play the Aeolian mode or the minor scale, right? Makes sense? So most of this universal knowledge applies across the board. But for this week, we're just going to focus in on the major scale, right? So the first one I have here is this open G here, right? Obviously from the cage. That's the big old cowboy G or rock G, whichever one you want to do, right? So that means that there would be a scale basically superimposed over top of that chord. Well, of course, we have the open position. Right? So that's a very important piece of information to understand, because later on you're going to be like, oh, well, if I move this to, like, say, a different position, right? Like, let's say I move it up here, this G chord, I'm now going to play as a D major chord. See if I were to keep going. But I can't do that, right? I can... Now I've got that scale as the open position here now fretted. See that? Whoops, my bad, right? And then I can keep going. That's the A type, right? If I were to do it somewhere else, obviously to get the, you know, the G as a C. There's so many more that you can do here. So remember, this piece of information is essentially universal. Yes, I'm showing it in the open position, but I can take that chord and now fret it up here on the fretboard. Maybe I want to do this B major. And now I have access to a major scale based off that root note. Okay? I know, getting a little complicated, but that's how it goes. So that's the relationship between this open G chord and in the cage system and the open scale here. But I can take both of those and fret them here at some other position and do the same thing again. Right? And I'm good to go. Now, the next thing is obviously, well, if I can do that, I can use other systems that we've already looked at, like the classical method. We call it the classical method because it just moves vertically up and down, and that used to be a very popular sort of system of teaching back in the old days. And then we also have 3 notes per string, right? Wow, I'm just all over the map today using the new picks, so it is what it is, boys. My bad. So essentially now we have the 3 major scales, one in the open position. We have the classical method. And we have 3 notes per string. So that's going to be helpful. Now we also know that there are chords involved with that. There's the G open chord that goes with the open one here. Then I've got the E type here. And I've also got the E type with respect to 3 notes per string. Right, so that's, I'm sweating a little bit here. I think I should have taken off the sweater, but whatever. I'm willing to sweat for you and this lesson. Okay, that came out weird, my bad. Right, so that's actually very, very, very important information to assimilate. Because if you can understand that basic principle, that opens up a lot of doors in terms of applying this information, like I said, to other positions on the neck. And actually working on it. You're like, okay, well, if I start here, what is the classical method? Oh, okay. That's no big deal, you know, but if I'm starting here, I've got this one here. What's this? Being able to train your ears to hear those interval structures so that you can just climb up the neck and whatnot using the major scale is obviously going to be a massive advantage to you. Then you can apply that same methodology, of course, to all the other scales. Done. And then you're like the shred machine too, like Guthrie and all these other amazing guitar players. That's basically the process by how you go from being, I don't really know how to do anything, to being the absolute shred lord. Or trying to get there, whatever. We can't always get to the, you know, Mount Olympus there, lads. So listen, just do the best you can. It's not about being the best guitar player in the world or the best musician. It's about enjoying yourself and expressing yourself on the instrument as competently as you can. The end. Be a force unto yourself rather than comparing yourself to other people. Okay? As far as the practice ideas, it doesn't, you know, it's obviously going to help if you start to combine these ideas together, right? So I start in the open position here. And you can kind of just keep working on sort of things like that, just breaking down the fretboard, sort of factoring in this pentatonics, yeah. Okay, I'm going to get carried away. I'm just going to stop right there. Just stop. But you're getting my point. You got to sit down and start combining those 4 pieces of information together. The pentatonic scale, the open position, the classical method, and 3 notes per string, all together into one cohesive unit. Then afterwards, you can start messing with it a bit, but we're going to look at that later on in the video when we start talking about how to approach these things with improvisational goals in mind, and you can change up the order and the sequence of the notes and using different techniques to accomplish that. But the actual notes themselves, the position on the neck and whatnot, will not change. There we are. Scales, done. Let's move on to arpeggios. All right, sexies, I missed something in the last section there. I want to just touch on it briefly. Listen, there's other ways of representing those scales. Obviously, if I were to move up, if you think about it, if I want to move up and down on the fretboard, I can just use the classical method, right? If I want to move diagonally, I can use this 3 notes per string. But if I want to move the other way diagonally, of course I can. Right, so listen, there's a lot of different ways, I should say, of sort of relating the same information back in a new way. You know, if you're starting with this sort of chord idea where using the cage system, there's another one to sort of, but that's based around more positions and on different strings kind of situation, but still they relate, right? Obviously, I have 4 or 5 different ways to represent the same collection of notes all over the fretboard. The only reason it's slightly different is because I can't obviously do that when I'm playing the G major scale, but it's there, right? Obviously, moving diagonally in the opposite direction can be done and should be learned so that you get the confidence. Trust me, that's the final boss level. If you can do all the modes playing basically that backwards, step pattern on each string, your total boss level, right? So don't forget that. So of course, we're going to repeat the same process we did with the scales now with the arpeggios. What is an arpeggio? So I take every other note in the scale and I basically play them one after another, right? Instead of a chord like this, I get 3 notes. That's that chord played in every sort of inversion. And this is when I put them all together. But I'm only playing 3 notes. I'm playing 6 strings, but I'm playing the same 3 notes across all 6 strings. I'm playing 6 strings as the arpeggio, but I'm always playing those 3 notes. Just in a new sequence, just like kind of like modes, but not. Modes are slightly different, but it's kind of the same principle. Okay, so essentially the first thing I want to do is just use the 3 octaves principle to get the lowest level piece of information, which is just your standard G major triad arpeggio, which is 1, 3, 5, moving to the next octaves, 1, 3, 5, moving to the next one, 1, 3, 5, right? Okay, that's the most basic piece of information. Later on, you can be like, oh, okay, well, yeah, it doesn't sound so good, but what if you had an extra note? Oh, okay, well, now that sounds way cooler than what I just heard before. Think outside the box. These are just shells of something waiting for you to fill it with something amazing, musically speaking. Remember that. You're the limitation, not the choices of notes on the fretboard, as it's made evident by like hundreds of guitar players that all sound completely different and unique. Remember that. You have to drive yourself. You have to be the creative force. You have to figure out how to put them together in the right method to sort of create something new. But don't look at something and be like, I don't know if I can really use that. Instead, take it and be like, now what can I do with this information? Because this sounds pretty important. And yes, it is very important. Similarly, just like we did with the scales, if I wanted to move this B note here, the 3rd degree of the G major scale, over here to the 7th fret, I all of a sudden get a different type of arpeggio shape, right? Same notes, just slightly different fingerings. That's me doing E minor 7 arpeggio there. Into a G major triad arpeggio. I know. Feel me, boys and girls and whoever else is watching, okay? So that's going to be obviously very important. Never look down your nose at simple information. Honestly, in most cases, it's the most important. Learn how to use that more effectively and you'll open so many doors so much faster instead of trying to go to the really complex ideas and be like, I am lost. You feel me? Done. Okay, so that's the lowest piece of information. Then when I get into like the classical method here with respect to these triad arpeggios, where I'm just still maintaining this B note on the A string. Now obviously that's not very conducive to sweeping, but it is in a way if you want to add in these extra sort of like color tones, like the 11. How did I know that was the 11? 1, 2, 3, 4. But in chord theory, I have to go every other note, so I have to keep going. So I have to take 4 and add 7. That gives me 11. Oh, which one's that? Oh, that's G. That's the first note. That's A. That's the second note. So 7 plus 2 gives me the 9. So that's G major 9 out of 11. Now all of a sudden you're starting to see the power of these sort of classical method ones. You can start adding in a lot of extra notes in the sequence and still maintain this awesome sweep ideas. Down, down, up, down, 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 down. Right? So it still maintains the idea that you can sort of simplify the technique to get the speed going on. Not my best, but you get the point. Okay, the next one is obviously I'm going to move this B here over to the 7th fret on the low E string, and I'm going to get this proper sweep. Now listen, it's not about the speed and all the rest of this stuff. Just practice it slowly and confidently. Okay, and those are the 3 essential pieces of information you need to know with the triads. 3 octaves. Classical, and the sweep shapes. The next step up on the food chain, if you will, is going to be the dominant 7/1s. Wait, sorry, I made a mistake. There's one more. There's one more in the triad. Which one did I miss? Who knows? Slam it in the comments right now. Whoever's first, you are the king of the internet for today. King for a day. Count of Monte Cristo. Go watch it. If I start on the 6th degree here, E minor in relation to this G major scale, and I kept moving down in the inversions, this minor triad superimposes itself over the 1st degree. Nice. So now I have 2 tools. I have the minor and the major again. Slowly. Okay, you're gonna just keep. Remember, don't be ashamed, or afraid to sort of like combine some of these ideas. So you maybe the arpeggio to a scale. Ooh, getting a little funky, a little spicy in there. That's what I do, boys. We get spicy all the time, 24/7. Okay, so don't be afraid to start combining some of these ideas. Maybe you're gonna go. Okay, it's a great way of sort of like starting to see how you can put these things together. But of course, when you're just starting out, try to practice them based around the idea that these things all go together, all the apples go together, all the oranges go together. And then later on, when you get more experience, then you can start mixing and matching and you'll have some pretty spectacular results. Right, so those are all the ideas. We have 3 octaves. We have classical. We have sweeps. as the major, and then we have, of course, the minor now, and of course we're going to move up the next step, of course, now that I've screwed it all up, and we're going to move into dominant 7, in this case major 7. Right, and then we have this minor 7, of course. Ooh, that's tricky. Doesn't want to cooperate. My bad, right? So you have those two shapes over top of each other. Those are also very important. Notice how I can take just the idea from the major triad, and then it evolves together. Now all of a sudden the major becomes the major 7 and the minor becomes the minor 7. I'm still using essentially the same notes. This minor, I'm adding this note, aren't I? I'm going. And once I get to there, I'm adding in this one, right? So all I'm doing is adding literally one note to that shape, but people get so easily confused. They're like, oh, well, it looks different to me because of the extra addition of the note. But essentially I'm using this as the skeleton and I'm enhancing it now with this minor 7 flavor or the major 7. Okay, very, very, very important. Of course, the last little piece of information that we can throw in there essentially is that you also can just take these notes and rearrange them so you can get different combinations. So on and so forth, right? So don't forget to sort of be like, if I move this B string over to here, there's the E string and blah, blah, blah. If I move the B, from the A string to the E string, that's kind of interesting. That opens up a whole bunch of new windows and stuff like that. So, experiment. That's a big part of the practice thing. I'm showing you sort of like the path, if you will, but it's up to you to sort of take it that extra step and really, really kick it into high gear and be like, okay, I'm seeing now how you can start to move stuff around and it doesn't really change the sound, but it just gives me a different feel. So if I was doing it like that before and my technique was horrible, if by just moving that one note to another string or something like that might solve all your problems, you'd be like, oh my God, seriously? Okay, so don't forget that. I've actually had that happen many times. Let's move on to the next most challenging section, the hybridization section, where we're just start mixing and matching all this craziness and adding in a few new tricks. Next. All right, sexies, for this last section, I'm just going to blister through this, obviously. These are evolutions of the ideas that we just looked at. Like, for example, with the minor pentatonic, I'm going to start factoring in some notes from the melodic minor and the 3 notes per string system with respect to the major modes, right? So that's using some chromaticism there, too. Again. Okay, so that's a great way of sort of changing things up. You can look at more exotic forms of like the major scale by just using the whole tone scale. 3 notes, 2, 3 notes, 2, 2, 3. Now that one's going to be incredibly difficult to play fast unless you chromaticize some of those whole steps, because doing 3 and 2 and stuff like that is just not conducive to playing fast. Right, remember always to resolve out of a tension-filled scale like that, never sort of stay in the tension. And you can just keep moving it up by whole steps, of course. So it's a very convenient scale to use to get some pretty cool outside sounds. Right, the next thing is just sort of spicing up some of the arpeggios. We could do like the Beatos. Or the super gambalis. That one is basically combining 3 and 1. That one's tricky thing. I'm doing a minor triad and then adding in that 9th degree, right? And then resolving out to the major. So that's a great sort of all-around super psycho sort of practice exercise. Covers a huge part of the neck, right? And it makes you play all the various techniques and everything else. Alternate picking, 3-in-1, sweeps, you name it. Okay, so then you can get into essentially like interval type scales or sequences. Right, you can do those intervals as far as the triad arpeggios, right? You got hybrid technique, right? You this. Right, that's from the major scale there. You could do it down here, you could do all of them. You could go the other way too, where you got the. That's another good one, right? You've got the basic idea of sliding. Right, as those type of moved around, sort of movable intervals. In that case, 6/3. 6. Okay, so you got like a ton of tools to work with there. It was just more of a sort of major 9. Me using, again, the hybridized technique to sort of move up through this G major scale, right? Again, using the D shape here. Okay, I know, I'm hitting you hard because that's how it works. So that covers basically everything. Start out with the scales, work your way up to the arpeggios, and then once you do that, come over to this section or really kick it up a notch and try to factor in some of these ideas and be like, okay, I see what they're doing. Questions? Comment me, slam the like button, smash the subscribe button. Thanks for hanging out. See you in the next one.